This is a true story of faith, prayer, and a miracle beyond medicine. You don't want to miss out on what happens in this life-changing story. Watch till the end. There are moments that split your life in two, the moment before you hear the words that change everything, and the moment after. For Sarah James, that moment came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The hallway outside the hospital room buzzed with machines and footsteps, but in her heart, everything stood still. The doctor closed the file. His eyes, heavy with compassion, met hers. "We've done all we can." And with those words, time seemed to stop. Her husband, Mark, clenched her hand so tight it hurt. But Sarah didn't notice. The words were too loud in her head. Done. All we can. Terminal. Stage 4 lupus. Organ damage. Unresponsive to medication. The disease was winning. She was 38 years old. But little did she, or her doctors, know. While they had come to the end of their road, God had just begun writing the second chapter. There are stories that begin with a diagnosis and end with a funeral. This was supposed to be one of them. When doctors say there's nothing more they can do, what happens next? For Sarah James, what came next wasn't death. It was a miracle. Her story doesn't just inspire hope, it breathes life back into it. Because behind every statistic is a soul. Behind every diagnosis is a family hoping, praying, and holding on. Behind every hospital bed is a story only God can finish. We live in a world where faith is often dismissed, and miracles are categorized as coincidence. But when science reaches its limits, and experts run out of answers, there's another realm that begins to move, a realm where God writes the script. This story is not fiction. It is not a dramatization. It is the true account of a woman who stared death in the face, was given a deadline, and lived to tell a different story. Not because of medicine, not because of chance, but because heaven stepped in. So if you're standing on the edge of your own impossible situation, let this testimony anchor your hope. Let it remind you that God is still writing, still moving, still healing. Sarah's journey is not just a story about surviving a disease. It's about discovering that faith isn't an escape from reality, it's an invitation for the supernatural to enter it. Sarah had always been healthy. She was the kind of person who rarely got sick and always pushed through discomfort with a smile. A mother of 2 boys, ages 6 and 9, and a part-time preschool teacher, Sarah had her hands full with life, faith, and family. It started with joint pain in her knees and fingers. She assumed it was exhaustion, or maybe arthritis from carrying her youngest too often. But within weeks, her fatigue turned into full-body weakness. Some days she couldn't get out of bed. She bruised easily. Her hair began to fall out in clumps. "I knew something was wrong," Sarah recalled, "but I kept postponing the doctor. I thought it was stress. I thought it would pass." It didn't. Her first ER visit was after she fainted while doing laundry. She was dehydrated, disoriented, and her kidneys were showing signs of failure. Within 48 hours, she was admitted for testing. Blood tests, biopsies, MRIs, consultations, and then came the diagnosis: systemic lupus erythematosus, SLE, an autoimmune disease where the body attacks its own organs. In Sarah's case, it had already damaged her kidneys, lungs, and joints. Worse still, she wasn't responding to treatment. "She's in stage 4. This is an aggressive variant," one of the specialists told Mark. "We can try palliative care, but you need to prepare." Sarah had been raised in a home that believed in prayer, but never had she needed faith like she did now. In her hospital bed, weak and barely able to eat, she turned her eyes upward. "God," she whispered, "if this is how it ends, I'll accept it. But I also believe you can turn this around." She couldn't explain it, but peace washed over her. It didn't come from a positive report, because none came. It didn't come from a miracle, yet. It came from surrender. Mark, though devastated, stood by her side. He read scripture to her daily. He played worship music softly by her bedside. The local church organized 24-hour prayer chains. Friends fasted on her behalf. People shared her name in prayer groups across the world. One elderly woman from the church walked into her hospital room one night, held her hand, and whispered, "God said, this is not the end of your story." Sarah smiled, weakly. She wanted to believe it, but her body told her otherwise. Despite the prayers, the medical situation worsened. Her kidneys were only functioning at 20%. Her breathing became shallow. Her doctors started talking about hospice care at home. Sarah had reached the lowest point in her life. The hope of recovery, medically, was gone. I remember thinking, this is it. I'll never leave this hospital. I'll never hug my kids again, she later said. But in the silence of that night, something shifted. Sarah describes it as a holy moment. She was alone. The machines beeped steadily. Her body was aching. And yet, she said she felt the presence of God like never before. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear a voice, but I felt something. Peace, joy, life. She reached for her Bible and turned to Psalm 118, verse 17. I shall not die, but live and declare the works of the Lord. She began to repeat it, over and over. I shall not die, but live. I shall not die. I will live. Something began to stir inside her spirit. The next morning, her nurse noticed something. Sarah had managed to sit up, unassisted. Her blood pressure was stable. Her oxygen levels were rising. 2 days later, she was walking, slowly but independently. Doctors were baffled. They ran tests, then ran them again. Inflammation, gone. Kidney function, improving. White blood cells, normalizing. What was happening wasn't explainable. Dr. Patel, one of the attending rheumatologists, was honest. This doesn't make sense. Nothing in our protocol would have produced these results this fast. Her body is recovering. Spontaneously. Sarah smiled through tears. Not spontaneously, she whispered. Supernaturally. In 2 weeks, she went from palliative care to outpatient recovery. Sarah was discharged 3 weeks after the worst diagnosis of her life. When she walked out of the hospital, the staff clapped. Her story had inspired the entire wing. One nurse cried and said, "You made me believe in miracles again." But recovery wasn't just physical. There was emotional healing needed too. Sarah had to process the trauma, the fear, the confusion. She began journaling daily, praying more deeply. She and Mark committed to counseling and started sharing their testimony with anyone who would listen. God healed my body, she said, but he also healed my heart. Her boys, who had been too young to fully grasp what was happening, now say, God gave us back our mommy. A year after her healing, Sarah was invited to speak at a women's conference. She stood in front of 400 women, held the mic with trembling hands, and declared, "The doctors gave up on me, but God never did." Tears streamed down faces as she described the journey. The diagnosis, the prayers, the surrender, the moment of divine intervention. After her talk, dozens of people approached her. Women with cancer, men with chronic illness, mothers praying for their children. She prayed for each one. Even if your healing doesn't come in the way you expect, she told them, God is with you in the fire, and He is faithful. Sarah's story began to spread beyond her community. Local media covered it. She was interviewed on a Christian radio station. Her social media exploded with messages from people worldwide. Hawe was going to give up on my treatment, but your story gave me hope. I didn't believe in healing until I saw you. And I'm praying again for the first time in years. But Sarah doesn't claim to have special faith. I was weak. I doubted. I cried. But even in that, God came through. Her story has inspired prayer movements, fasts, and healing services. Mark often says, "We thought we were losing her, but God used that moment to give birth to a ministry." To this day, Sarah gets yearly checkups. Her medical records are clear. No signs of active lupus. Her specialists still shake their heads in disbelief. But Sarah doesn't need their validation. She knows the truth. The doctors gave up. But God? He was just getting started. Maybe you're facing something impossible today. A diagnosis, a crisis, a broken heart. Maybe the world around you has given up. But here's Sarah's story. Let it sink deep into your heart. God is not done. He still heals. He still moves. He still writes stories that defy the odds. So don't stop praying. Don't stop believing. Because where man ends, God begins. If this story touched your heart, like and share this video to spread hope. And if you're in need of prayer, drop your request in the comments. We're here to believe with you.